The message came formatted like an apology. It was not an apology. I was 3 cups into a debrief at Lunar Command when my aide Cole slid the tablet across the table without a word. The council seal sat at the top of the document, 7 points gold on black. I had seen that seal on 3 ceasefire treaties, 2 humanitarian resolutions, and 1 declaration that placed humanity under provisional quarantine. The quarantine had lasted 11 years. Nobody had asked us if we agreed. I tapped it open with 1 finger. Read it the way you read a diagnosis you already knew was coming. The council's language in the document was extraordinary, like silk draped over a blade. Remediation units was what they called the fleet they had dispatched toward human-occupied space. Not an assault force, not a kill fleet. Remediation units, the kind of phrase that sounds like they were sending plumbers. Containment directive was the order those units carried, not invasion orders, not a war declaration. Containment directive, as if humanity were a spill on a clean floor. Species-level noncompliance correction was the formal name for what would happen to us if the containment directive proceeded without resistance. The translator note at the bottom of the document read, "No equivalent human idiom exists, closest approximation. Pest control." I set my coffee mug down. It was ceramic earth-made, chipped on the handle in a way my mother had always called character. I stared at it for a few seconds, not because I had gone somewhere else in my head, because I needed something solid under my hand. That had nothing to do with that document. 17 species had voted for this. 17 civilizations, each older than human, riding each with fleets that dwarfed anything we had put in space, had looked at humanity and decided we were the problem that needed correcting. Unanimous. I picked the mug back up, finished the coffee. Cole was watching me from the far side of the table. He was 26 and good at his job, which meant he was also good at reading rooms. He had gone very still. "Pull up Admiral Chow," I said. "Red channel now." "Yes, Commander." I slid the tablet back toward the center of the table and did not look at it again. There was an attachment buried in the data appendix at the bottom. I had almost missed it. A roster, Kepler station identification tags, cross-referenced against the remediation strike zones already logged in the Council's operational timeline. The same names, all the same names. 4,216 of them. I had memorized that number 3 years ago, on a Thursday, which people in my line of work started calling the Tuesday thing, because calling it what it actually was felt like standing too close to something that still had heat. I did not explain this to Cole. I did not explain it to anyone in that room. I pulled on my jacket, tucked the tablet under my arm, and walked toward the command deck. They sent a fleet. They called it a remediation. They cross-referenced it against a loss they had already caused once and apparently considered a precedent worth repeating. Bless their hearts, they had no idea what that meant. Admiral Chow was on the channel inside 4 minutes, which was fast for a man who slept in a pressurized bunk 3-star systems away. His face on the screen looked the way it always looked before. Something terrible became something organized, calm in the way that means all the alarm has already been processed and filed somewhere. It cannot interfere with function. Tell me, he said. 17-0 vote. Remediation fleet already. Dispatched, I put the tablet against the screen pickup so he could read the header. They attached the Kepler roster to the operational timeline. He looked at it for 2 seconds. How long do we have? If they are running standard council approach vectors 8 days before they are in range of the outer settlements. Assets. 14 vessels positioned and ready. I need authorization to treat this as a reckoning grade response. Chow had been in the fleet for 30 years. He had negotiated 2 of those 3 ceasefire treaties with the council. Seals on them, he had sat across tables from species who could dismantle a moon if they felt creative about it, and he had not blinked once. He looked at me through the screen. Authorization granted, he said. Bring it home, Vera. He closed the channel. I turned to Cole. I need every strike team leader on a secure line in 20 minutes. I need the tactical board updated with the remediation fleet's last known positions, and I need someone to make more coffee. Cole moved. The room around me moved. People who were good at their jobs doing what good people do when there is. I stood at the window of the command deck and looked out at the dark. The council had sent killers dressed. Paperwork efficient, clean. They had done it before, and it had worked before. And nothing in their data or their models or their 1,000 years of managing lesser civilizations had given them any reason to expect this time would be different. I thought about my mother's chipped mug. About 4,216 names, about the particular way that certain kinds of anger feel less like emotion and more like a tool you reach for because it is solid and familiar and it steadies the hands. We were not a peaceful people who had reluctantly learned war. We were something else entirely, something the council's models had never accounted for, because the models looked at our cities and our treaties and our carefully worded diplomatic protests and concluded they understood what we were. They had read the surface, they had never read what lived underneath it. 8 days. I went to work. The War Council convened at 400 hours in a room that had no windows and no chairs, comfortable enough to make anyone want to sit for long. That was intentional. Long snorts meetings make people soft. We did not have time to be soft. 12 humans around a table plus 1 alien. Envoy Esrathville had technically been assigned as an observer. He was a council defector, which made him useful, and also made him the kind of person you watch from the corner of your eye, the way you watch a pot you're not sure has fully cooled, 4 limbs, gray skin that had a faint iridescence under artificial light. He smelled like ozone and old paper, which was either a species characteristic or the result of spending too long in human-controlled atmospheres. He had shown up to the War Council without being invited. I had let him stay because watching him watch us was giving me useful information. He kept doing the alien equivalent of blinking too fast, the specific gesture his species made when its probability models were failing in real time. Admiral Chow was at the head of the table eating a sandwich, not because he was relaxed, because he had learned decades ago that his body would not give him the option to eat once the operational phase started, and a commander who collapses from exhaustion in the 4th hour of a crisis is not a useful commander. Lieutenant Cruz was arguing with the engineering lead, a sharp woman named Lena, about optimal reentry vectors for the outer settlement corridors. They were not arguing the way people argue when they are afraid. They were arguing the way people argue about something they have already decided to solve and are simply working out the clearest path to the solution. Specialist Torres was asleep in her chair. She always did this before deployments. I had served with Torres for 6 years. She could fall asleep in a drop bay in the back of a shuttle descending through atmospheric turbulence. She said it was a skill. She was right. A soldier who cannot rest between the decision and the action is a soldier who arrives at the action already worn down. Esrathval was watching Torres sleep with the expression of a being whose categories had just failed him. I pulled up the tactical board and began rotating the ballistics chart, not because I needed to look at it again. I had it memorized. I rotated it because it kept my hands occupied and because there was something in the movement that helped me think. The remediation fleet's lead formation, I said to the room, is configured for a standard council containment sweep, 3 wings covering the primary human settlement corridors. Simultaneously, they expect us to respond with what we have where we have it, which means they expect a scattered reactive defense. Lena stopped arguing with Cruz. Torres cracked one eye open. We are not going to do that, I said. I pulled the holographic overlay and placed our 14 vessels on the board. What I showed them was not a defense. It was a shape, 14 ships positioned not to block the Council fleet, but to redirect it. The way a river is not stopped by the rocks in its path, but shaped by them. Turned, sent somewhere specific. We are not defending our positions, I said. We are inviting them into a corridor of our choosing. The room was quiet in the way a room goes quiet when people are thinking hard and fast. Then Cruz said, that puts the outer settlements in the initial approach path for approximately 4 hours, I said, during which time our settlement teams will have completed full evacuation of the 3 Etrusc zones. You are assuming the evacuation completes on schedule, Lena said. Lieutenant Park's team will make sure it does. Park was not in the room. Park was already on a transport to the outer corridor. I had sent him 2 hours before the War Council convened because Park was the kind of officer who did not need to be in the room where the plan was made. He just needed to know what needed to happen. He would figure out how. Esrathval had been silent for the entire briefing. When I paused to let the room absorb the shape of the plan, he spoke. He addressed me specifically, not the Admiral, not the room, me, because I seemed to him the most senior, which in council terms meant the most likely to give an explanation that made sense in his framework. Commander, he said. His translator rendered his voice as something low and precise, like a well-maintained instrument. Your species has been issued a termination-grade directive by a coalition of 17 civilizations. Their combined fleet capacity exceeds your own by a factor of 43. Their remediation units are purpose-built for this kind of operation. They have executed similar directives 11 times in the past 200 years. All 11 target species are no longer active. He paused. Why are none of you afraid? The room did not react the way he expected. Lena went back to looking at the reentry vectors. Torres closed her eyes again. CEO took another bite of his sandwich. I stopped rotating the ballistics chart. We are afraid, I said. He looked at me, waiting. We are extraordinarily afraid, envoy. Every person in this room is operating under a level of stress that would functionally disable most species. That is not an exaggeration. Human fear responses are among the most intense in the documented biological record. Then why? Because fear is not the question, I said. Fear tells you the situation is serious. You already know the situation is serious. The question is what you do after fear tells you that. He did not have a word for this. I watched him search for one in whatever mental framework he had built for understanding us. He did not find it. I reached across the table and pulled up the Kepler station roster, projected it on the wall behind me. 4,216 names in small text. It still covered the entire wall, every name, every person who had been in those corridors, in those quarters, in those research pods when the first remediation directive had come through, the one the council had also called a containment measure, the one that happened on a Thursday 3 years ago that I called the Tuesday thing, because there are some things you learn not to say too often or they start to cost you something you cannot afford to spend. The room went fully quiet. Even Lena stopped moving. The council sent killers, I said. Those are the names of people those killers already visited. I need to be very clear about what we are sending back. I turned off the projection. This is not a revenge operation, I said. Revenge requires an emotion, investment in the other parties. Suffering, we do not have time for that. And it would not serve the mission. What we are executing is a complete demonstration. We are going to show the council in terms they cannot dismiss or reinterpret exactly what happens when they point a remediation fleet at humanity. And after the demonstration, Rathville asked, after the demonstration we talk, I said, but they need to see it first, because nothing we say will mean anything to 17 civilizations that have executed this directive 11 times without consequence. Words are only credible when the person speaking them has already shown you what they can do. Rathville was quiet again. The blinking had slowed. I defected from the council, he said, slowly, because I believed their model of humanity was incomplete. I could not quantify how. He looked around the room at Tors, sleeping, at Cruz sketching approach vectors on a data pad, with the focused calm of a person solving a puzzle, at CEO finishing his sandwich, at Lena cross-checking supply chain logistics with the same expression she might use while reviewing a grocery. Said, your model of yourselves is different from their model of you. Their model is not wrong, I said. It just does not account for the relevant variable, which is. I picked up the ballistics chart. Rotation again. We have been afraid the entire time. Humans have existed. Every predator on our home planet was bigger and faster and stronger. Every winter was a genuine question about whether we would eat enough to survive it. Every other group of humans was a potential threat before. They were a potential ally. We evolved inside fear. It is the oldest thing we have. I set the chart down. We did not overcome it. We built everything we are. On top of it, the cities, the ships, the treaties. All of it is what afraid creatures make when they refuse to stop. The room was quiet. Then Tors, without opening her eyes, said also we are stubborn as anything. Someone laughed. It broke the tension. The way a window breaks, clean and sudden, and then the room was moving. Again, 12 people turning back to their work with the specific energy of people who have been reminded of what they are and why it matters. Esrathville watched us for a long moment. Then he picked up a data pad from the table and asked Lena if she could walk him through the approach vector calculations. She did not look up from her screen. Sure, she said, pull up a chair. He did. I went back to the tactical board. 8 days, 14 ships, 1 shape. We were not going to fight a larger fleet. We were going to show it something it had never encountered and would not know how to categorize until it was already over. The chase started on day 3 and was not technically a chase. That was the first thing the Council's remediation fleet got wrong. I watched the tactical board from the command deck of our lead vessel while Lieutenant Cruz updated position markers in real time. The remediation fleet, 40 ships, purpose-built for exactly this kind of operation, had arrived at the outer settlement corridor expecting to find a scattered human defense trying to hold ground. What they found was nothing. Clean space, evacuated settlements, no resistance at the initial contact points, and 14 human ships that were not blocking them, not engaging them, not doing anything that matched the tactical templates the Council's commanders had trained on for their entire careers. The remediation fleet repositioned 11 times in the first 6 hours. I know what repositioning looks like. When it is tactical and intentional, I also know what it looks like when it is a symptom. They are reorienting again, Cruz said. I know. That is 12 times. I know. What are they looking for? Us, I said, in the place they expect us to be. The Council's remediation commanders had a tactical vocabulary built from 11 successful operations against 11 species that had responded to overwhelming force, the way most species with any instinct for survival respond: retreat, negotiate, attempt to protect the most populated zones, concentrate assets at the most defensible positions, and hope the attacker has limits. We were not doing any of that. We were moving, not retreating, moving with a specific purpose that did not map onto any pattern in their database, which meant their commanders kept repositioning to find an angle that made sense to them. Every time they repositioned, they moved a fraction closer to the shape I had drawn on the tactical board 4 days earlier. They were doing it to themselves. Gas station contact, Cruz said. Team 4 is on approach. Lieutenant Park's team was operating in a different sector entirely. Team 4 was led by a young officer named Cal, who had the particular quality of seeming unremarkable until the moment he was in a situation that required something extraordinary, at which point he became very difficult to account for. Gas station was a Council garrison. Outpost, 40 units, solid fortifications. At every standard entry point, the kind of defensive setup that, according to every tactical manual ever written by species with strategic sense, should have held long enough to matter. Cal's team took it in 11 minutes. I read the after-action report twice. The garrison had correctly identified and fortified the 4 logical entry points. They had coverage on every approach corridor. Their positioning was by any standard framework correct. What they had not covered was the maintenance access shaft on the Station's lower ring, which was pressurized at a level that required specialized equipment to navigate and which no tactical manual had ever listed as a viable assault entry point because the logistics of using it were, in standard calculations, too complicated to be worth the effort. Cal's team had used it anyway. They had also used the exterior hull in vacuum, moving on magnetic clamps at a rate of advance that the garrison's external sensors had classified as debris drift and therefore ignored. I had not ordered either of those approaches. Cal had looked at the station, run his own calculations, and decided the math on a direct hull walk was more favorable than it appeared in the standard model. Then he had done it. No casualties on our side. I set the report down and picked up the one thing I had been carrying since we cleared gas station's deck. A small energy sidearm that had belonged to a council remediation unit, still half-charged. The grip was designed for a hand configuration that was nothing like mine, which meant it sat awkwardly in my palm in a way I found informative every time I held it. I was not going to use it. I did not entirely understand why I was carrying it. I held it the way you hold something that used to be in the possession of someone who thought they were the dangerous party in the room. Intercepted transmission coming through, Cruz said. Council encrypted. We are on the decryption now. Play it when it is clear. The decryption took 4 minutes. The council used a cipher system that was genuinely excellent. It would have stopped most species cold. Humans had broken it in 37 hours during the initial intelligence phase, not because we had better tools, but because we had put 8 cryptographers in a room with the problem, told them they had 2 days, and let them compete with each other. Competition is a remarkable motivator. When the people competing are good at what they do. The transmission played. Council Commander Vreth Shao addressing High Command. His voice through the translator was controlled in the specific way that means the control is costing something. They are not retreating, Vreth Shao said. I want to be precise about this, because the distinction matters. Retreating force moves away from contact to preserve itself. These vessels are not moving away from us. They are moving in a pattern that I cannot model with the tools I have available. Every time we reposition to establish favorable contact geometry, they have already accounted for the repositioning, not reactively. They accounted for it in advance. A pause. I do not understand the vector. I do not understand the endpoint. I am requesting immediate consultation with High Command Tactical Division, and I am formally noting in this record that my operational projections require revision. The transmission cut. Vreth Shao's ship disappeared from the board 4 seconds after sending it. Cruz did not say anything for a moment. Then Harding. Yes, I said. He figured it out right before the end. Yes. Did not help him much. No. I turned the sidearm over in my hand, set it on the console, picked it up. Again. There was something sitting at the edge of my thinking since gas station, since the after-action report, since the transmission. Something I had not expected to feel in the middle of an operation and did not have a clean place to put. We were genuinely something, in a way, that was difficult to look at directly. 11 species. The Council had done this 11 times, 11 civilizations who had seen the fleet coming and responded the way the Models predicted and been reduced to data files in the Council's historical archive. They had been real, they had been alive, they had built things and named things and wanted things, and then they were documentation. And here we were, 14 ships, a factor 43. Disadvantage, and Vrethshal writing his final transmission that he could not model the pattern, because the pattern was not in any model, because the pattern was what you get when you take afraid creatures who built everything they are on top of their fear, and you give them a problem that has no comfortable solution, and you watch what they do instead. Cal walking on the exterior hull and vacuum because the math looked more favorable. Tor sleeping before a deployment because she knew how to manage her own resources. Crews arguing about approach vectors at 4:00 in the morning because the problem was interesting, and interesting problems deserve full attention. Esrath Vel, a council defector, sitting next to Lena and learning to read a human ballistics chart because the council's model was incomplete and he wanted to understand. I sat with that for a moment. Then the board updated. The remediation fleet's latest repositioning was complete. I looked at where they had placed themselves, then I looked at where I had pre-staged 6 of our vessels 4 days ago, silent and dark in the gravity shadow of a collapsed stellar remnant at the edge of the Kalani Nebula. The remediation fleet had just moved into the approach geometry that put those 6 vessels directly behind them. Their 40 ships had been reduced to 6 operational units across 3 days of engagement. Those 6 had just positioned themselves inside a corridor. They could not exit without passing through either our 12 active vessels ahead or the 6 silent ones behind. The shape on my tactical board was complete. I opened the communications channel to the surviving council vessels. This is Commander Vera Akafernash. Human diplomatic enforcement, you have been issued a reckoning grade directive by one civilization with a factor 43. Fleet disadvantage and 14 vessels against 40. I let that sit for a moment. You have 6 ships remaining, we have 14 all operational. I am inviting you to stop moving and listen to what I am about to say, because what I am about to say is more valuable to you than any alternative currently available. The 6 ships stopped moving. Thank you, I said. We would like to discuss what this means for your operational model going forward. I closed the offensive channel and opened the link to crews. Make sure none of our vessels cross into their exit corridor, I said. They need to feel like this is a conversation, not a trap. Is it a conversation? Crews asked. It is both, I said. The best conversations are. I set the sidearm down on the console, picked it up again. Hunting implies the prey does not know. That is not what this was. Vrethshal had figured out what was happening at the very end. That was in a strange way the most important part, not because it changed the outcome. It did not change the outcome, but because it meant the Council's next report on humanity would contain, in the words of their own commander, confirmation that the pattern was not predictable. That was the message that mattered. Not the 14 ships, not the 6 remaining. The message was that Vrethshal had run every model available to a seasoned Council commander and then written in his last recorded transmission that the models required revision. We were almost ready to deliver that message in person. The council chamber on Solon Prime had been constructed 400 years ago to receive the representatives of civilizations that the council had already decided were worth receiving. It had hosted 32 species across 2 centuries of what the council called the expansion of recognized civilization. 32 species, ceremonies, speeches, the careful, formal language of beings who had decided they were the adults in a room full of children who needed guidance. I walked in alone. That was the council's condition. Representative of humanity. Unaccompanied, as a demonstration of good faith before formal proceedings could begin. The implication being that a species that arrived alone was a species that trusted the process, that trusted the room. I trusted the room the way I trust well-maintained piece of equipment. I understand exactly what it does, and I do not make assumptions about what it will do beyond that. The chamber was designed to make visitors feel small. 17 tiers rising on all sides, each occupied by representatives of the council species. The ceiling 700 ft above, lit in the particular spectrum that mimicked the light of Solon Prime Sun, which was dimmer and cooler than Earth's, and produced the constant impression of an overcast afternoon on a world that had decided to make you feel slightly less substantial than you were when you walked in. Every surface said, "You are temporary, and we are permanent." I looked up at the ceiling for a moment. Then I walked to the center of the floor, where a negotiating table had been placed. 7 million years old, according to the council's own documentation. Stone from a planet that no longer existed. Every significant species agreement in the council's history had been reached across this table. I set my coffee mug on it. The ceramic made a small, clear sound against the ancient stone. The mug was chipped on the handle, earth-made. My mother had owned it for 20 years before she had used it every morning of her adult life and called the chip the handle character. Several of the council representatives on the lower tiers shifted, not dramatically, the slight repositioning of beings who had encountered something they had not accounted for and were recalibrating. Presiding speaker Alith Von addressed me from the highest tier. Alith Von was the oldest representative in the chamber, a fungal-based species that measured their own age in geological cycles rather than years. The translator rendered her voice as something resonant and layered, like sound moving through dense material. "Commander Akafor Nash," she said, "you are the representative of humanity." "I am." "You present yourself alone, without delegation, without formal security arrangement." "Yes." She processed this for a moment. 17 tiers of 17 species processed it with her. I had been briefed on most of them. Some communicated in color shifts, some in subsonic frequencies, some in complex gestures that their translators converted to language. All of them were watching me with the specific attention of beings who had expected something different and were not yet sure what to do with what they had got. "We will proceed," Alith Von said. The formal proceedings took 40 minutes. I let them take 40 minutes because formal proceedings serve a function even when, and especially when, everyone in the room already knows the substance of what needs to be discussed. The structure of a formal process gives all parties the language they need to refer back to later. It creates a Records matter. I listened, I answered when addressed. I did not volunteer information the proceedings did not ask for. Then the formal proceedings concluded. Elith Vaughn was silent for a moment after. The closing formula, the silence had a texture to it, not awkward, deliberate. You should be extinct, she said. Not as an insult, it was a statement of genuine, undefended confusion. The kind of thing you say when reality has failed to align with the model you built for it, and you are still trying to understand where the model went wrong. Our projections were thorough, she continued, the fleet capacity differential, the technological disparity, the historical precedent from 11 prior operations, every variable we measured placed your species in a state of non-viability within 4 days of the remediation directive's execution. I looked at her. I know, I said. She waited. Your projections were not wrong, I said. The variables you measured were real. The math was correct. The fleet capacity differential was exactly 43-1. The technological gap was accurate. The historical precedent was valid. I paused. You modeled the wrong species. The chamber was quiet. 700 ft of quiet. From the floor to the ceiling and back. Elaborate, Elith Vaughn said. You looked at humanity's history and you saw cities, treaties, diplomatic protests, appeals to the council through formal channels over 11 years of quarantine. You saw a species that builds infrastructure and negotiates and organizes its conflicts into legal frameworks. I put both hands flat on the table on either side of the coffee mug. That is all accurate. We do those things, but those things are not what we are. Those are what we built because of what we are. A representative from the third tier shifted in a way the translator rendered as request elaboration. What you are, I said, before you are diplomats or builders or signatories to any agreement, is the oldest surviving thing in your species' history. You are what was there before the cities, before the language, before the first agreement between two groups of your kind. I looked around the chamber. Every species in this room is the descendant of something that survived long enough to build what you are now. That is the common thread, but the conditions of that survival were not the same for all of you. Some of you evolved in environments that rewarded cooperation above all else. Some of you in environments that rewarded patience. Some of you in environments where the primary pressure was navigating complex social structures. I picked up the coffee mug, held it. Humanity evolved in an environment that rewarded refusing to stop. Every predator we shared our planet with was larger and faster. Every winter was a genuine threat. Every neighbor was a potential danger before they were a potential ally. We spent 200,000 years being the most vulnerable and most persistent creatures on a planet that was trying to remove us from it. I set the mug back down. You looked at the civilization we built and concluded you understood us. You modeled the diplomatic protests, the formal appeals, the ceasefire treaties. You concluded that a species capable of those things was a species that could be managed with sufficient force. I looked at Elith Vaughn. You never modeled, built those things. You never asked what a species looks like when it refuses to be removed from existence. The chamber held its quiet. I reached into the case I had carried to the table, removed 17 data cores, placed them in a line across the stone surface. one for each council species represented. In the chamber, each core contained the complete operational record of the past 8 days. Every strike team decision, every moment. A human officer made a choice that fell outside any predictive model, every intercept, every repositioning. The complete record of what 40 council vessels had encountered when they arrived, expecting a species that would behave the way the model predicted, including Vrethsal's final transmission. "This is what we sent back," I said. "Not a counter fleet configured for maximum destruction, not a negotiating delegation, not a surrender." I tapped the first core. "We sent you a complete record so that your models can be updated, so that the next time a council vote is called on a species-level directive against humanity, the beings casting that vote have accurate information about what they are voting for." Alith Von looked at the line of data cores, then at me. "You are not here to negotiate terms of peace." "There is nothing to negotiate," I said. "We were not at war with the Council. The Council issued a directive. We responded to the directive. The directive is no longer operational. We are here to discuss what comes next." "And what comes next," she said slowly, "is determined by us." "No," I said, "what comes next is determined by accurate information, which you now have, and by a choice that 17 civilizations make with that information in front of them." I let that sit. "Then we want what we have always wanted. We want to be recognized as a peer civilization with standing in this council. We want the provisional quarantine formally dissolved. We want the 11 species currently on your active remediation list reviewed by an independent panel rather than a unanimous vote of the species that benefit from their removal. And we want a formal acknowledgement that the Kepler Station Directive 3 years ago was a mistake." The chamber was very quiet. "And if we refuse?" a voice from the upper tiers asked. I did not need to identify the speaker. It was the question the room had been moving towards since I walked in. I looked at the chipped mug on the 7-million-year-old table, my mother's mug. Earth clay, the chip on the handle that she called character. Envoy Vrathshal was a capable commander, I said. He saw what was happening in his last transmission. He understood what he was looking at. He described it accurately. I lifted my eyes back to Ileana. "You have his record in those cores. You can read exactly what a capable council commander said when he encountered us in a situation with no comfortable exit." I picked up the mug. "You know what that means for the next time?" Ileana was quiet for a very long time. The kind of quiet that is not absence, but presence, the stillness of a very old mind working through something that does not fit the categories it has used for 400 years. "What do you want?" she asked. "Same thing we always wanted," I said, "to be left alone." Silence. Then the chamber began to move, not dramatically, no speeches, no gestures of a formal alliance, the slow, careful movement of 17 civilizations beginning to revise a model they had been wrong about for 11 years. I left the data cores on the table, took my coffee mug, walked out of the chamber. The treaty passed in 6 days. Formal recognition, not provisional, not monitored, not qualified with language. That meant the Council reserved the right to reconsider if humanity failed to meet benchmarks they had never shared with us directly. Full recognized standing, equal vote. Same footing as any of the 17. On day 7, I found out through intercepted council internal communications that 47 remediation directives against other species had been quietly withdrawn from the active queue. No announcement, no documentation. Released to those species, no acknowledgement that the directives had ever existed. I put that information in a file labeled Collateral Outcomes. I did not tell anyone about it. Not because it did not matter, because it mattered in a way that required thinking carefully about how to use it, and I was not ready to do that thinking yet. The celebrations on Earth started on day 6. I watched them on a delayed feed from the command deck, streets full of people, lights, the particular sound of a planet that had been holding its breath for 8 days finally exhaling. Someone on one of the major broadcasts called it humanity's greatest triumph. I turned the feed off. Triumph requires an ending, clean edges, a before and an after with the line between them clear enough to celebrate. This did not have that. What this had was a new situation with new variables, and the same 4,216 names that I had started with, and those names were not gone, and the fact that the council had signed a recognition treaty did not change what they were or where they were. Admiral Chow sent me a message that evening, 4 words. He was not a man who wasted words. Well done, he wrote, rest now. I read it 3 times, then I filed it next to the Collateral Outcomes document and did not reply until the next morning because I did not trust what I would say before I had slept. I slept 4 hours. It was not restful sleep. It was the kind of sleep you get when your body has simply run out of options and takes what it can get. I dreamed about nothing specific, just the particular texture of being very far from something and knowing the distance cannot be shortened. I woke at 300, which is when I always wake when something is unfinished. Cole had left a routine operational summary on my desk. I read every page of it twice because reading the routine things carefully is the discipline that keeps you sharp for the non-routine ones, and because I needed something to do with my hands while I worked out what I was going to do next. What I was going to do next was not in the report. I booked a personal transport for the following morning off the main command registry, not hidden. I was not hiding it. I simply filed it under personal travel, which is the category it belonged to, and I did not tell anyone where I was going because no one needed to know, and because there are places you need to go alone or you have not really gone at all. Kepler Station's debris field was 3 hours from Lunar Command at standard transit speed. I flew it in 2 and 1-2. The field was immense. That is the word. Immense. It does not mean large in the way that planets are large or that star systems are large. It means large in the specific way that things become large when they are made of pieces of something that used to be whole. The debris caught the light from the nearest star at angles that changed constantly as the pieces moved in their slow gravitational drift, and the light made some of them look briefly like they were still functioning, still powered, still part of something. They were not part of something, they were the aftermath of something. I cut my engines and let the transport drift in the outer edge of the field. I knew the geometry of this debris field, the way I know the layout of my own quarters. I had mapped it once, 3 weeks after what my colleagues called the Tuesday thing. in a 6-hour session that I had conducted, in a state of profound sleep. Deprivation because I had not let myself sleep for 4 days before that. I mapped it because I needed to know where everything was, because not knowing felt like a failure of responsibility, and I did not have anywhere to put that feeling except into work that was at least adjacent to the thing I was trying not to look at directly. I knew which sector corresponded to the administrative wing, to the family quarters, to the research pods along the eastern ring, to the observation deck where a woman named Nora had taken photographs of deep space phenomena and submitted them to Earth publications under a pen name because she thought her research credentials made professional photography seem frivolous, which was the kind of thing people think when they are alive and concerned about how they appear to others. Nora was in the debris field. Everyone I was thinking about was in the debris field. I floated there for a long time. I did not say anything. I had thought at various points over the past 3 years about what I would say if I ever came back here. I had constructed sentences in my head during transit jumps and during debrief sessions and during the specific kind of insomnia that comes not from unease but from having too much to process and not enough framework for processing it. None of the sentences fit when I was actually here. There is nothing that fits, that is the honest truth of it. Language is built for things that have edges, beginnings and endings, subjects and predicates. What you feel when you float in the debris field of 4216 people is not a thing with edges. It does not begin or end. It simply is the way the field is, turning slowly in the dark, made of pieces of something that used to be whole. I was there for approximately 2 hours before Esrathvil's ship came out of the dark. He did not hail me first. He did not announce his approach. He simply came out of the dark at a careful speed and cut his engines when he was alongside me and sat there in the same drift. He transmitted one line of text to my console rather than opening a voice channel. I appreciated that. Voice channels require a response. Text can sit. I wanted to understand the text read. I did not respond for a long time, maybe 20 minutes, maybe more. I was not tracking time carefully. Then I transmitted back, "You cannot." His response came immediately. "I know." I looked at his ship sitting alongside mine in the drift of the field. He had come 3 hours from Lunar Command, off the main registry, to sit in silence in a debris field that was not his species, loss and not his grief, and that he would never be able to understand from the inside. "But you came anyway," I transmitted. "Yes," he sent back. I thought about what that meant, not the travel, not the logistics, the snorts. Fact that he had decided at some point in the past 24 hours that there was something important about being present in a place even when you could not understand it from the inside, that bearing witness is something you offer even when you cannot share the weight of what you are witnessing. The Council's model of humanity had not accounted for a lot of things. It also had not accounted for what happens when a being that defected from the Council sits in silence in a human debris field because it wanted to understand, knowing it could not, and came anyway. That was not nothing. That was the beginning of something. I sat with that thought, turned it over, set it down carefully in a place I would be able to find it later. There is a particular kind of grief that does not move toward resolution. It does not progress through stages and arrive at acceptance on the other side. It simply becomes part of the landscape, part of what the world looks like from where you are standing. You do not heal from it and you do not carry it. You exist alongside it, the way the debris field exists alongside the star it orbits, the way everything that is real about loss exists alongside everything else you are still doing. I reached into my jacket. The remediation sidearm, half charged. Grip designed for hand configuration. Nothing like mine. I had carried it since gas station. I had not used it. I had not intended to use it. I had carried it the way you carry certain things that are not yours and will never be yours, but that you cannot put down until you are somewhere that can hold them. This was somewhere that could hold it. I opened the airlock hatch. The minimum necessary, the pressure equalization, took 4 seconds. I held the sidearm in my hand one last time. The weight of it, what it had been sent to do, who it had been sent to do it to. I set it into the drift. It turned once as it left my hand, caught the starlight briefly, the way the debris caught it, the way everything in this field caught it and gave it back. Changed, then it moved into the dark and became part of the drift, tumbling slowly away into the field, into the long company of 4,216 names. I sealed the hatch, sat back in the pilot's seat, looked at the field for a while longer. The way it moved, the slow gravitational patience of it, the way the pieces of things turned in the light of a star that did not know what it was lighting. As Rathville sent another text, "Is there anything I can do?" I thought about that for a longer time than the question probably warranted. Not because the answer was complicated, because the question was asked by a being who had understood without being told that doing was not always the relevant category, who had sat in silence for 2 hours and then asked anyway, because asking acknowledges the other person in a way that silence, however respectful, cannot fully achieve. "No," I transmitted, "but thank you for asking. I will stay as long as you need," he sent. "I know," I sent back. I did not need him to stay long. I needed to do one thing, and then I was going to go home. I opened the comm channel, not to Earth, not to Lunar Command, not to S. Rathville's ship sitting alongside mine in the drift. I opened it to nothing, to the frequency that carries signal into open space and does not expect a reply, the kind of channel that goes outward and does not come back. "We are still here," I said. My voice in the empty cockpit was not loud, not formal, not the voice I use in command decks or council chambers, just my voice, the one that exists before all the other versions of it. I closed the channel, started the engines. S. Rathville's ship came alongside me as I turned for home, and we flew the first hour in parallel before he peeled off toward his own registered docking bay, and I watched his navigation lights move away through the viewport until they were small and then gone. The rest of the flight back I spent thinking about nothing specific, not the treaty, not the operational data, not the 47 directives that had been quietly withdrawn from the Council's active queue, not the Kepler roster or the after-action reports or the chipped mug sitting in my jacket pocket. I thought about Cal walking on the exterior hull of a station in vacuum, because the math looked more favorable. I thought about Tor sleeping in her chair before deployment. I thought about CO eating a sandwich at 4:00 in the morning in a war council meeting because he understood what his body would need. Later, I thought about Crew's arguing approach. Vectors with Lena, both of them already. Treating the problem as solved already. Working backward from the solution they had decided they would find. I thought about S. Wrathful sitting in the drift of a debris field for 2 hours. Because he wanted to understand, knowing he could not, and coming anyway. The council had sent killers dressed in paperwork and called it a remediation directive. We sent Reckoning back. Reckoning looked like 11 minutes at gas station and a chipped coffee mug on a 7-million-year-old stone table and a woman floating in a debris field with nothing that fit, and the understanding that nothing fitting was not the same as there being nothing to say. Reckoning looked like 47 directives, quietly removed from an active queue, because someone finally revised a model. Reckoning looked like a council defector, sitting in silence alongside a human ship in the dark in a field of loss that was not his, because he understood that presence is sometimes what you offer when understanding is not available. We did not win because we were stronger. We were not stronger. The math had been 43-1, and the math had been real. We won because we were the thing we had always been, underneath all the cities and the treaties and the carefully worded appeals to civilizations that had decided they knew what we were. We were 200,000 years of refusing to stop. We were afraid creatures who built everything on top of their fear, because stopping was not one of the options. We were gas station. We were the silent ships in the gravity shadow of a dead star. We were the chipped mug on the ancient table. We were 4,216 names in a debris field that would orbit its star for 10,000 years. We were still here. That was what we sent. That was the whole of it. The lights of Lunar Command came into view through the viewport, and I reduced speed, and Cole's voice came through on the standard channel asking if I needed docking assistance, and I said no, I had it, and I brought the transport and myself steady, and even the way you do something you have done 10,000 times and intend to do 10,000 times more. I landed, walked through the dock, got to my office, made coffee, sat down, opened the file labeled collateral outcomes, started reading. There was still work to do. There was always still work to do. That was the thing about still being here.